It was a quiet night, and the human, Daniel, was sitting alone in his small house at the edge of the colony town. The streets were empty, and the rain outside kept falling without pause. The storm had been strong for hours, and most people had locked their doors early. Daniel sat near his old heater reading a book when suddenly, knock, 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 the sound was sharp and desperate. Daniel froze for a second. No one visited him at this time of night. The clock showed midnight. He frowned and stood up slowly. The knock came again, faster, more urgent. He walked to the door, hesitating. His hand hovered over the lock when a voice came through the door. Please, please let me in. It was not a human voice. It was soft, trembling, and alien. Daniel's heart beat faster. He opened the door just slightly, and what he saw made him step back. A woman stood there, tall and slender, her skin pale blue and glowing faintly under the rain. Her dark eyes were filled with fear. She was holding the hand of a little girl no older than 6. The child looked weak, her clothes wet, her eyes tired. The woman whispered again, her voice shaking. I ran away from my husband. Please let me in. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He looked at the strange sight in front of him. An alien widow and her little daughter standing helpless in the storm. He knew from the markings on her face that she was from the Yalari, a proud alien race that often looked down on humans. But here she was, begging him for shelter. He opened the door wider, unsure of what he was doing. The woman stepped in quickly, pulling her daughter with her. She shivered from the cold, her wet clothes clinging to her thin body. The girl leaned against her mother, silent but shaking. Daniel shut the door and locked it. The storm roared outside. For a moment, silence filled the small house. He turned to them. What's going on? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman looked at him, her lips trembling. I had no choice, she said. If he finds me. If he finds us. Her voice broke. She held her daughter close and whispered something in her own language, calming the child. Daniel noticed the bruises on her arms. They were deep, ugly marks. Not all were from falling or accidents. Some looked like burns. Some looked like claws had left them. The little girl's eyes met Daniel's for a moment. They were wide and scared, but also strangely trusting. Daniel felt a heavy knot in his chest. He had lived alone for years. He had seen many aliens pass through this town, but never had he seen one like this. Broken, afraid, and desperate. You can stay for tonight, he finally said. But you need to tell me who you're running from. The woman nodded quickly, her eyes full of relief. Thank you, she whispered. He brought them blankets, and the girl curled up on the couch, clutching the warm fabric like it was treasure. The mother sat beside her, her hands trembling. Daniel gave them both hot tea, and for the first time the little girl smiled faintly. But Daniel's mind was restless. Why would an alien widow come to him, a simple human, for help? What kind of husband would make her flee into the storm with a child? He watched as the woman's eyes darted to the window, as if expecting shadows to appear at any moment. She was not just scared. She was hunted. Daniel finally asked, Your husband, who is he? The woman lowered her gaze. Her voice was almost a whisper. He is powerful, dangerous. He will not stop until he takes her back. She touched her daughter's hair gently. And if he does, she will not survive. The words chilled Daniel. He did not fully understand, but he knew one thing. By opening his door tonight, he had invited more than a guest. He had invited trouble and maybe even death. The storm outside grew louder. Thunder shook the sky. Somewhere in the distance, faint lights passed through the clouds, lights that didn't belong to the storm. They belonged to ships. Hunters were already searching, and Daniel realized his quiet life had just ended. The storm continued outside, thunder rolling across the night sky. Inside Daniel's small home, the firelight flickered on the faces of his unexpected guests. The little girl was asleep now, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, her breathing shallow but steady. Her mother, however, sat awake, her hands clutching the edges of her robe as if she feared someone would tear it away. Daniel sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He had so many questions, but he didn't know where to begin. Finally, his eyes settled on the dark marks on her arms. They weren't just bruises. They were ugly, swollen, almost glowing faintly in the firelight. What happened to you? He asked softly. The woman looked away, her jaw tightening. She pulled the fabric of her robe closer to her body, but Daniel had already seen the burns on her shoulder, the claw marks across her ribs. He doesn't let me heal, she whispered. Her voice cracked, trembling with shame and pain. Every time I tried, he hurt me again. Not only with his hands, but with words. He wanted me to be silent. He wanted me to be afraid. Daniel felt anger stir inside him. He had seen cruelty before, on Earth, in wars, in poverty. But there was something different here. Something darker. Her eyes, wet with tears, met his. "I am Yalari," she said. "We are not supposed to beg. We are not supposed to run." But I had no choice. He would have destroyed her. She nodded toward her sleeping daughter. Daniel's gaze softened when he looked at the girl. She was small, too small for the weight she carried. Her hands twitched in her sleep as if even dreams offered no peace. "Why me?" Daniel finally asked. "You could have gone to anyone. Why come to a human?" The widow lowered her head as if ashamed. "Because humans are the only ones who help without asking for power in return." She swallowed hard. "You're kind. You protect strangers. I saw it before. I hoped maybe you would protect us too." Daniel was silent. The weight of her words pressed against him. He had never thought of humans that way. He had always believed they were weak compared to the great alien empires. But to her they were hope. Then a sudden noise broke the silence. Thud. Both of them froze. The sound had come from outside the house, near the back wall. Daniel stood quickly, motioning for her to stay quiet. He moved toward the window, pulling the curtain just a little. In the darkness, through sheets of rain, he saw faint lights. Red scanning beams moved across the muddy streets. His stomach dropped. "They're searching already," he whispered. The woman's face went pale. She clutched her daughter protectively, pulling the blanket tighter around her small frame. "It's him," she breathed. "He sent them." Daniel closed the curtain and turned back. His heart pounded. He had let them in, and now the hunters were at his door. "You can't stay here long," he said quickly. "If they find you, they will kill you," she finished. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. "That is why I should leave." "I cannot bring death to your home." Daniel shook his head. "You think I'll just open the door and let them take you? After what I've seen?" His voice grew harder. "No, you stay here. I'll handle it." She stared at him in shock, as if unable to believe a human would risk his life for her. Before either of them could speak again, the little girl stirred. She whimpered in her sleep, whispering in her alien tongue. Her mother leaned down, whispering back softly, calming her. Daniel noticed something strange. As the widow touched her daughter's forehead, the girl's skin shimmered faintly, like silver light moving beneath her skin. It was brief, almost invisible, but Daniel caught it. "What was that?" he asked, his voice low. The woman froze, her hand still on her daughter's head. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, she spoke. "She is the reason he will never stop," she whispered. "My daughter carries a gift. A power my husband wants for himself. If he takes her back, he will use it for war. And she will not survive the weight of it." Daniel's chest tightened. He understood now. This wasn't just about an abusive husband. This was about something bigger, something dangerous. The storm raged outside, but inside the little house another storm was brewing. The hunters were getting closer, and the truth was only beginning to show. Daniel clenched his fists. He had lived a quiet, simple life. But tonight everything had changed, and he knew one thing with certainty: protecting them was no longer a choice. It was his duty. The rain slowed just before dawn, but the streets of the colony town were no longer safe. Strange shadows moved between the houses, and the low hum of alien drones echoed through the mist. The hunters had arrived. Daniel stood near his window, careful not to move the curtain too much. He could see them, tall figures in black armor, their helmets glowing faint red. They carried long staffs that pulsed with energy, weapons not made for mercy. A sleek drone floated beside them, shining beams of light into every corner, scanning doors and windows. The widow sat on the floor near the couch, holding her daughter close. The child was awake now, eyes wide with fear. Her small fingers clutched her mother's robe tightly. "They are searching every house," Daniel said quietly. His voice was tight with worry. "It won't take them long to reach this street." The woman closed her eyes for a moment. "He sent his personal hunters. They will not ask questions. If they sense her presence..." She stroked her daughter's hair, her voice trembling. "They will burn everything until they find us." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Why would anyone let this happen? Doesn't your people stop him?" The widow shook her head. "He has power, influence, no one dares oppose him." Her eyes filled with despair. "That is why I ran. That is why I came to you." Outside, the hunters moved closer. Their boots hit the wet ground with heavy metallic sounds. Daniel counted them, 6 figures and 2 drones. Too many for him to face directly. He turned back to her. If they come here, they'll find you. I need to move you somewhere they won't look. Where? She whispered. Daniel thought fast. His house had an old cellar, a space beneath the floor where he once kept tools and supplies. It wasn't much, but it could hide them for a little while. Come with me, he said quickly. He pulled aside the rug in the center of the room and lifted a trap door. The wood creaked softly, revealing the dark space below. It smelled of dust and earth. The widow looked at it with hesitation, but Daniel nodded firmly. They won't scan this low. Stay quiet. Don't move until I say. The mother nodded, lifting her daughter carefully. The little girl buried her face against her mother's shoulder, trying not to cry. Daniel helped them down, then closed the trapdoor and pulled the rug back over it. The room looked normal again, though his heart raced with fear. Moments later, heavy knocks struck the front door. Bang! 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 Daniel's breath caught. He forced himself to walk calmly to the door. When he opened it, a towering hunter stood there, red eyes glowing behind the mask. Human. The voice was deep, mechanical. We are searching for fugitives. You will open your home. Daniel forced a tired smile, rubbing his eyes as if he had just woken up. Fugitives? In this weather? You must be joking. Nobody's been here all night. The hunter stepped inside without permission, scanning the room with his weapon. Daniel's fists tightened, but he kept his voice casual. Careful with the mud, will you? This is a small place. The hunter ignored him, walking across the room, scanning walls, windows, even the fireplace. Another hunter entered, pointing his weapon at corners. The drones floated in, their red beams crawling across the floor. Daniel stood perfectly still, his mind screaming. Beneath his feet, just under the trapdoor, the widow and her daughter were silent as stone. He prayed they would not make a sound. One drone hovered dangerously close to the rug. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. The machine beeped softly, scanning. Daniel coughed loudly, stepping closer. Listen, I don't know who you're after, he said, voice annoyed. But I'm just a human farmer. Nothing important here. If you break something, I can't replace it. The hunter turned, staring down at him. You will be silent. The moment stretched long. The drone whirred, then slowly pulled back, its light fading. Finally, the hunters moved toward the door. If you see anything, report it, one of them ordered. Sure, Daniel said, forcing a smile. I'll be the first to call. They left. The sound of boots and humming drones faded down the street. Daniel closed the door slowly, his hands shaking. He waited until the noise was gone before pulling back the rug and lifting the trap door. The widow and her daughter looked up at him. Their faces pale, their bodies trembling. They're gone, for now, he said softly. The woman climbed out, clutching her daughter. Her eyes shone with tears. They will return, she whispered. They always return, Daniel nodded grimly. Then we'll be ready. But deep inside, he knew the hunt had only just begun. The morning sun broke weakly through the storm clouds, but the colony town did not feel safe. The streets were nearly empty, as if people already sensed something dangerous moving in the shadows. Daniel looked out from his small window, scanning the street. The hunters had disappeared hours ago, but he knew it was not over. They will be back, the widow whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around her daughter. He never stops. Not until he gets what he wants. Daniel turned from the window and looked at her. Her pale blue skin seemed even paler in the daylight. The bruises on her arms were clearer now, dark and cruel. His fists tightened again. We can't stay here, Daniel said. They'll return, and if they search harder next time, they'll find you. The widow shook her head slowly. We cannot run. His ships cover the skies. Wherever I go, he will follow. He wants her. She pulled her daughter closer. Daniel crouched down in front of the girl. Why does he want you? He asked softly. The child looked away shyly, her small hands gripping the blanket. The mother answered instead. Because of what she carries. Her blood is different. Her gift is rare. He wants to use her as a weapon. Her voice broke. But if he tries, she will not survive it. Daniel stared at them both. A cruel husband, an innocent child, and a secret powerful enough to bring hunters to his door. He had no plan yet. But he knew one thing. He could not give them up. Then, without warning, the sound came. Whir, boom. The front wall of his house shook violently as something struck it from outside. Dust rained from the ceiling. The girl screamed, clinging to her mother. Daniel rushed to the window. A hunter stood in the street, his staff glowing with red energy. Behind him, 2 drones hovered, their beams cutting through the walls like knives. They had returned, and this time they were not searching. They were attacking. Daniel ducked back as another blast hit the window, shattering glass across the floor. "Get down!" he shouted. The widow shielded her daughter with her body. Daniel grabbed the only weapon he owned, an old plasma cutter he used for repairs. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The door exploded inward. A hunter stepped through, tall and menacing. His mask glowed red as his weapon crackled with energy. Daniel fired the cutter. A bright beam of blue light shot across the room, striking the hunter's chest. The alien staggered back but didn't fall. His armor sizzled, smoking where the beam hit, but he raised his staff again. Daniel cursed under his breath. His tool wasn't strong enough to stop them. The widow stood suddenly, her eyes burning with defiance. She spread her hands, and for the first time, Daniel saw a faint shimmer of light around her. It wasn't strong, but it was enough to push the hunter back a step. "Go," she shouted. "Take her." She pushed her daughter toward Daniel, but Daniel didn't move. He raised the cutter again and fired another shot, this time at the ceiling beam above the hunter. The wood cracked and collapsed, forcing the alien back under falling debris. "Move now," Daniel yelled. He grabbed the widow's arm and pulled her and her daughter toward the back of the house. The hunters outside shouted in their harsh language, their boots pounding as they surrounded the house. The 3 of them burst out the back door into the muddy yard. The storm had left the ground slick, slowing their steps. One of the drones spotted them and fired a beam that sliced across the dirt, missing them by inches. Daniel turned and hurled a heavy tool at it, knocking the drone off balance for a moment. "Keep running!" he shouted. The widow stumbled, but Daniel caught her. The little girl cried, her voice high with fear, but she kept moving. Behind them, the hunters broke through the ruined house, their weapons glowing brighter. Daniel knew they couldn't outrun them forever. They needed cover. He spotted the old irrigation tunnels that ran under the colony fields. If they could reach them, they might hide for a while. "This way," he pointed, dragging them forward. A blast struck the ground nearby, sending dirt and smoke into the air. Daniel threw himself over the widow and her child, shielding them as debris rained down. His ears rang, his chest burned, but he pulled them back to their feet. The hunters were closer now, their voices sharp and cold. One raised his staff, aiming at the child. Daniel's heart stopped. Without thinking, he stepped in front of her, raising the cutter again. He knew it wasn't enough, but he wouldn't move aside. Then something unexpected happened. The little girl cried out, a soft sound almost like a sob. But as she did, the air around her shimmered, glowing silver. A wave of energy burst outward, knocking the hunter back several steps. His weapon dimmed, his mask cracked, Daniel's eyes widened. The widow gasped, pulling her daughter close. "She cannot control it," the mother whispered. "It comes when she is afraid." The hunters hesitated now, their weapons flickering. Even they had not expected this. Daniel grabbed the moment. "Run!" he shouted. They sprinted toward the tunnels, the widow clutching her daughter, Daniel right beside them. Behind them, the hunters regrouped, their voices filled with rage. The attack had failed for now, but it was only the beginning. The tunnels were dark and damp, water dripping from the stone ceiling. Daniel led the way with a small lamp, the dim light bouncing across the narrow walls. Behind him, the widow carried her daughter, her pale skin glowing faintly in the shadows. The child was exhausted, her eyes half closed, but she clung tightly to her mother. Daniel's chest still burned from running. His mind was racing. The hunters had nearly killed them, yet something strange had happened. The little girl's power had saved them. He had seen it with his own eyes. A burst of silver energy, strong enough to push armored hunters back. When they stopped to rest in a wider chamber, Daniel finally spoke. His voice was low but steady. "What was that? What did she do?" The widow sat down carefully, holding her daughter in her lap. She looked at Daniel with tired, haunted eyes. For a moment, she stayed silent, as if deciding whether to trust him with the truth. Finally, she whispered, "You deserve to know." Daniel crouched beside them, waiting. "She is not ordinary," the widow said, her voice trembling. "She was born under the twin suns of my world. Among the Yalari, children born in such light carry a gift, a rare power. Some call them blessed, others call them cursed." Her hands shook as she stroked her daughter's hair. "My husband saw her gift the day she was born. He wanted to shape it, to make her a weapon for his armies. I begged him to let her grow as a child, to live free. But he refused. He hurt me when I tried to stop him. He promised he would take her power even if it killed her. Daniel's stomach tightened. He looked at the small girl, so fragile, so innocent. It was hard to believe anyone could see her as a weapon. "That's why you ran," Daniel said softly. The widow nodded, tears filling her dark eyes. "Yes, I waited until he was away. I took her in the night with nothing but what I could carry. We traveled for weeks, hiding, starving. I thought we were safe here among humans. But he sent hunters even to this world. He will never stop." Her voice broke. She pulled her daughter closer, whispering in her language. The child stirred weakly, murmuring in her sleep. A faint silver glow pulsed under her skin again, fading quickly. Daniel leaned back against the wall, his mind heavy with the weight of her words. He had lived a simple life, far from politics, far from war, but now he was sitting in a dark tunnel with a hunted widow and a child carrying power that could shake empires. "You should have told me earlier," Daniel said. His tone wasn't angry, just firm. The widow lowered her gaze. "I was afraid. If you knew, you might have turned us away. Humans have no reason to fight for us." Daniel let out a long breath. "Maybe not. But I'm not letting him take her. Not while I'm alive." Her eyes widened, shimmering in the dim light. "Why? Why would you risk yourself for us?" Daniel's face hardened. "Because I've seen what happens when the strong prey on the weak. I won't stand by and let it happen again." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber. Only the dripping water echoed. Then the widow reached out, her trembling hand brushing his arm. "You are different from him," she whispered. "Different from all of them. You see us not as tools, but as people." Daniel looked at her, then at the sleeping girl. He felt something shift inside him. Something stronger than fear. Responsibility. But before he could speak, a distant sound echoed through the tunnels. A metallic hum. The widow stiffened, her eyes wide. "They found us," she whispered. Daniel stood quickly, grabbing his lamp. "Move," he said sharply. "We can't stay here." They began running again, their footsteps splashing in the shallow water. The sound of the hunters grew closer, their mechanical voices bouncing off the walls. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, they would be cornered. But now, at least, he understood why. The secret was out. The child wasn't just a victim. She was the reason the hunters would never stop. And Daniel knew one thing with certainty. If the mother's secret was true, then the battle ahead was far bigger than just survival. It was about stopping a cruel man from turning an innocent child into a weapon that could tear the galaxy apart. The hunt wasn't just for her life. It was for everyone's. The tunnels stretched for miles under the colony, but they were not endless. Daniel knew that sooner or later the hunters would trap them inside. The faint metallic hum behind them was proof. They were closing in, step by step. Daniel held the small lamp high, leading the widow and her daughter deeper. His mind raced with possibilities, but every option seemed impossible. The little girl was too tired, the widow too weak, and he had no real weapons. Finally, they reached a dry chamber where the tunnel split into two paths. Daniel stopped, catching his breath. "We can't keep running like this," he said. "They'll catch us." The widow sank down onto a rock, holding her daughter close. The child's eyes flickered open for a moment, silver light pulsing faintly under her skin, before she drifted back to sleep. "We cannot fight them," the widow whispered. Her voice was heavy with fear. "Their armor, their weapons, too strong, and he has more ships above us." Daniel crouched in front of her. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. "Then we don't fight them head on. We outsmart them." The widow looked up, her face pale in the lamplight. "Outsmart them how?" Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "I used to work maintenance for the colony fields. These tunnels are connected to the old irrigation system. Most of it was shut down years ago, but some parts still work. Water pumps, pressure valves, backup fuel lines." Her eyes widened slightly. "You mean to use the tunnels themselves?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. If I can overload the pressure system, it'll cause a flood in one section. Enough to trap them, maybe even wash some of them away. It won't kill them, but it'll buy us time." The widow hesitated. "It is dangerous." Daniel almost smiled. "Everything tonight is dangerous." He stood and looked at the two tunnels. One path leads to the old pump room. The other leads out to the colony fields. That's where you need to go with her. He pointed to her daughter. Her eyes widened. And you? I'll stay behind long enough to trigger the flood. Then I'll catch up. The widow's hands tightened around her daughter. Her voice was sharp with fear. No! If you stay, you may not return. Daniel met her gaze firmly. If I don't, none of us will survive. The silence stretched long between them. Finally, the widow bowed her head. She understood. They moved quickly. Daniel led them partway down the escape tunnel, then stopped. He handed her the lamp. Keep moving forward. When you see daylight, don't stop. Blend in with the workers in the fields. Humans don't matter to the hunters. They'll ignore you if they don't sense her power. The widow swallowed hard. She looked at him, her dark eyes shimmering. Why do you do this, human? Why risk everything for us? Daniel's voice was steady. Because no one else will. For a moment, she looked as if she wanted to say more. Instead, she simply nodded and held her daughter tighter. Daniel turned and sprinted down the other tunnel, his footsteps echoing. The sound of hunters was closer now, their metallic voices sharp and angry. He reached the pump room, a large rusted chamber filled with pipes and old machines. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, but Daniel knew the system still had power. He had repaired it once, long ago. He pulled open a control panel, sparks flying as he reconnected wires. His hands worked quickly, his mind focused. He could already hear the hunters entering the chamber behind him. One drone floated into the room, its red light scanning. Daniel ducked behind a pipe, holding his breath. The drone whirred, moving closer. Daniel grabbed a metal wrench and hurled it across the room. The sound distracted the drone just long enough for him to reconnect the final wire. The pumps roared to life. The ground trembled as water surged through the pipes. Daniel pulled the emergency valve. Boom! A massive wave burst into the tunnels, flooding the chamber where the hunters stood. Water slammed into them, sweeping drones against the walls, knocking the armored figures off balance. Their voices turned into distorted roars as they were pushed back by the torrent. Daniel braced himself, holding onto a pipe as water surged past him. His chest burned, his arms shook, but he held on. Finally, the flood slowed. The chamber was knee-deep in water, but the hunters were gone, washed back into the lower tunnels. Daniel staggered to his feet, dripping wet but alive. He didn't wait. He ran toward the escape tunnel, praying the widow had made it out. When he finally reached the end, daylight hit his eyes. He stumbled out into the wide colony fields. Workers were already moving about, unaware of the battle below. He scanned the crowd and then he saw them, the widow holding her daughter, walking quickly among the workers. She looked back once, her eyes meeting his. Relief washed over her face. Daniel walked toward them, exhausted but steady. For now, they had escaped. But he knew the hunters would return. And next time, even a flood might not be enough. The colony field stretched wide under the pale morning sun. Rows of crops swayed in the cool wind, but the peace was a lie. Every shadow felt dangerous, every sound carried fear. Daniel walked with the widow and her daughter through the crowd of workers, but his eyes kept searching the sky. And then he saw it. A massive ship broke through the clouds, dark and sharp like a blade. Its engines roared, shaking the earth. Workers stopped what they were doing and looked up in terror. Daniel's stomach sank. This was no hunter patrol. This was him. The husband had arrived. The widow froze, clutching her daughter so tightly the girl whimpered. Her face turned pale, her lips trembling. "He came himself," she whispered. "We are finished." Daniel grabbed her shoulder firmly. "No, not finished. Not while I'm here." The ship landed at the far edge of the fields, dust and fire swirling around it. From its ramp, armored soldiers marched out in rows, their weapons glowing. And then, slowly, he appeared. The husband. He was taller than the hunters, wrapped in dark armor that shimmered like obsidian. His mask revealed his face, sharp features, eyes glowing faint red. His presence was heavy, cruel, like a storm given form. The soldiers surrounded the field. Workers scattered, running for their lives. Only Daniel, the widow, and her daughter remained in the center. The husband's voice thundered across the field. "You think you can run from me, Salira?" His gaze locked on the widow. "You think you can hide my daughter among vermin?" The widow flinched at his words, but Daniel stepped forward, putting himself between them. "She's not yours anymore. Not her, not the child. You'll never take them back." The husband laughed, cold and sharp. "A human? You dare stand in my way?" He raised his hand and his soldiers aimed their weapons. Daniel's heart pounded, but he didn't move. He gripped the old plasma cutter in his hand. It wasn't much, but he held it steady. Behind him, the widow whispered softly in her daughter's ear, calming her trembling body. The husband's eyes narrowed. "Step aside, human. This is not your fight," Daniel's voice was firm. "It is now," the husband snarled, lifting his weapon. But before he could strike, the little girl cried out, a sound pure and sharp. Silver light exploded around her, brighter than ever before. The ground shook. The soldiers staggered, their weapons flickering. The husband shielded his eyes, his face twisting with rage. "No," he roared. "She is mine." Daniel turned to the widow. "She can't control it, can she?" Celera shook her head, tears running down her face. "Not yet. Her power comes only with fear." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Then we don't let her be afraid." He turned back, stepping forward boldly. The silver light swirled around him now, brushing against his skin but not harming him. The husband aimed his weapon and fired. A blast of red energy shot across the field. Daniel dove aside, the beam scorching the ground. He rolled, raised his cutter, and fired back. The beam struck the husband's armor, sparking but not piercing. The alien laughed. "Is that all you have?" Daniel stood, his chest heaving. "It's enough to slow you down." The soldiers moved forward, but the widow raised her hands. A faint shield of light shimmered around her and her daughter. It was weak, but it held back the first wave of fire. Daniel charged forward, dodging blasts, closing the distance. He swung the cutter like a blade, striking the husband's weapon, knocking it aside for a moment. Sparks flew. The husband slammed his fist into Daniel's chest, throwing him to the ground. Pain shot through him, but he forced himself up again. Blood filled his mouth, but he stood tall. "You'll have to kill me first," the husband sneered, raising his weapon for the final strike. But before he could swing, the little girl screamed again, louder, stronger. Her power surged, silver light erupting across the field. It wasn't just fear this time. It was anger. It was love. The wave struck the soldiers, sending them crashing to the ground. Their weapons shattered, their armor cracked. Even the husband staggered, his armor glowing red as it resisted the force. Daniel saw his chance. He lunged forward, driving the cutter into the cracks of the husband's chest plate. Sparks exploded. The husband roared in fury, grabbing Daniel by the throat. But then the widow stepped forward, her hands glowing with borrowed light from her daughter. She struck her husband with all her strength. The silver light surged into him, shattering his armor. The husband screamed, his body trembling with rage and disbelief. Then, with one final burst of energy, he was thrown back, crashing into the dirt. His soldiers lay scattered, defeated. Silence filled the field. The husband struggled to rise, his armor broken. His eyes filled with hatred, but the widow stood over him, her daughter's light shining through her. "It ends here," she whispered. "You will never touch her again." The husband's eyes flickered once, and then he collapsed unconscious. Daniel dropped to his knees, exhausted, every muscle screaming. The widow fell beside him, holding her daughter close. The little girl was crying softly, but the silver glow was fading. Daniel looked at them both, his vision blurred but his heart steady. "It's over," he whispered. The widow turned to him, her eyes full of tears. "No, human. It is only beginning. But because of you, she has a future." For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to smile even through the pain. He had faced something greater than himself, and he had not stood alone. The storm had ended. The fight was won, and in the quiet morning light a new bond was forged between a human, an alien widow, and a child whose power could change the stars.